The big, heavy doors of the courthouse creaked open as Pam Bondi stepped inside. Her shoes made a click, click, click sound as she walked across the shiny floor. The air smelled like old books and coffee, a smell Pam knew well. This was a place where people fought battles, not with swords but with words and evidence. But today felt different. This case was big. A huge, powerful company had done something wrong, and Pam was here to prove it. They had a lot of money, fancy lawyers, and important friends, but none of that scared Pam. She had the truth on her side. At the front of the room, Judge William Thornton sat high up on his big wooden chair. He had a stack of papers in front of him and was flipping through them. His face didn't show much emotion, but Pam noticed a tiny smirk, a little smile like he didn't take her seriously. She had seen this look before. Some people thought she was too young or not important enough to win a big case like this. But Pam knew better. She took a deep breath, sat at her table, and opened her big black case file. Across from her, the other lawyer, Daniel Whitmore, adjusted his fancy silk tie. He was an older man who had been in court for many, many years. He didn't even look at Pam. He thought he had already won before the case even started. Then the jury walked in. These were regular people, men and women who had jobs, families, and everyday lives. Some looked bored. Some looked curious. Pam looked at each one carefully. She didn't just see faces. She saw stories. She needed them to understand what was really happening. The bailiff, the man who helps keep order in the courtroom, stepped forward and said loudly, "All rise." Everyone stood up. The judge fixed his black robe and cleared his throat. "Be seated," he said in a bored voice. He shuffled his papers again, then looked at Pam. "Miss Bondi, I trust you're ready to begin?" Pam nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge let out a little chuckle, almost like a laugh. "Let's hope this doesn't turn into a circus," he muttered, just loud enough for the microphone to pick up his words. Some people in the courtroom laughed quietly. Daniel, the fancy lawyer, leaned back in his chair and smirked. He was sure Pam didn't stand a chance. But Pam didn't react. She had seen this happen before. People laughed at her before she spoke. But by the end of this trial, no one would be laughing. She stood up, her voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, this case is about more than just legal rules. It's about making sure people are treated fairly." But before she could finish, the judge held up his hand to stop her. "Miss Bondi," he said, his voice impatient, "we're here for a simple hearing, not a big speech." A few people chuckled again. Pam stayed calm. Across the room, Daniel was smiling as he adjusted his shiny gold cufflinks. He had done this so many times before. He was used to protecting big companies and making problems disappear. Pam clasped her hands behind her back. "I understand, Your Honor. But the facts speak for themselves." The judge sighed. "That's a strong accusation, Miss Bondi. Do you have proof?" Pam looked him in the eye. "I do, Your Honor. And I will show it to you." The judge raised an eyebrow, still looking like he didn't believe her. "Well, let's hear from the defense first." He turned to Daniel. "Mr. Daniel, please explain." Daniel stood up smoothly, smiling at the judge. His voice was calm and confident. "Your Honor," he said, "this whole case is built on feelings, not facts. My client is a respected company. They follow all the rules. If people misunderstood the contracts, that's unfortunate. But it's not illegal." He shrugged. "This is just another case where someone is mad at a big company for being successful. There's no fraud, no cheating. Just a misunderstanding." The judge nodded slowly, thinking about what Daniel said. Then he chuckled and looked at Pam. "Miss Bondi," he said, "are we really going to waste time on a misunderstanding?" That was a big insult. But Pam didn't react. She let the silence sit in the air. The whole courtroom was watching her now. Then she picked up a document and walked toward the judge's bench. "No misunderstanding, Your Honor," she said. "Just evidence." She placed the paper in front of him. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at the paper. His smirk started to fade. Pam turned to the jury. "What Mr. Daniel calls a misunderstanding is actually a plan. A carefully planned trick to fool customers into signing contracts they don't understand." She pointed to a big stack of papers on her desk. "And I have the proof." The room got quiet. Even the judge sat up straighter. But Pam wasn't finished. She picked up another document and held it up. "Your Honor, Mr. Daniel says this is just one mistake. But it's not just one. I have over 50 contracts here. And they all have the same tricky words hidden inside." She opened the document to a page and read out loud. Section 14B. The company can raise fees based on market trends. She looked at the jury. "That sounds harmless, right?" she asked. "But guess what? The company decides what the market trends are. They can raise prices whenever they want and no one can stop them. She flipped to another page. Section 22C. Customers who try to take out their money early have to pay penalties. She looked around the room. That sounds normal, right? But here's the trick. Those penalties are so high, people lose all their money before they even realize what happened. The jury shifted in their seats. Even Daniel's confident smile was starting to fade. The judge looked at Daniel. Mr. Daniel, he said, do you have an explanation for this? For the first time, Daniel hesitated. He laughed nervously. Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't see how just one document. But Pam was already reaching for more. Not just one, Your Honor. She grabbed the entire stack of contracts. I have over 50 contracts, all filled with the same tricks. These customers thought they were signing up for a safe deal, but instead they were being set up to fail. The judge's face changed. He wasn't smirking anymore. Pam looked at the jury. This company lied, she said. And now it's time for them to be held accountable. The room was silent. No one was laughing now. Pam turned another page of the big, important document. It was Section 31A. She read it out loud. The company is not responsible for money lost in the market. That meant if people lost money because of the stock market, the company wouldn't help them. But Pam looked up at the judge and the jury. What this paper doesn't say, she explained, is that my client's money was never put in the market at all. She placed the paper down on the table and looked around the silent courtroom. Instead, she continued, their money was taken and used for risky, secret business deals. These deals made the bosses rich while my clients, the people who trusted them, knew nothing about it. She shook her head. This isn't just bad business, she said. This is stealing. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Judge Thornton, who had looked amused earlier, now leaned forward. His hands were folded and he was listening closely. Pam looked straight at him, not scared at all. Your Honor, she said, we can argue all day about the meaning of fraud and lies. But what I won't accept is my clients being treated like they just didn't read the papers carefully. She pointed to the other side of the courtroom, where the company's lawyer, Daniel Whitmore, sat. He shifted in his seat, his face stiff. The only mistake here, Pam continued, is that this company thought it could get away with this forever. Daniel cleared his throat and sat up straighter. Your Honor, I request that these claims be thrown out because... Pam raised her hand, cutting him off before he could finish. Before Mr. Daniel goes any further, she said smoothly, I'd like to show one more piece of proof. She walked over to her files and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a secret note from someone inside the company, a whistleblower. She handed it to the court officer, who brought it to the judge. Judge Thornton read the first few lines and his jaw tightened. Pam turned back to the jury. This document, she explained, comes from someone inside the company. It shows that the bosses knew they were tricking people for over 5 years. She took a breath and read from the paper. Delay telling the truth for as long as legally possible. She looked at the jury. Some of them frowned. Others looked shocked. One woman in the front row pressed her lips together and shook her head. Pam turned back to the judge. This isn't a simple mistake, Your Honor, she said. The company knew what it was doing. And they thought the law would protect them. The judge let out a slow breath through his nose, still looking at the paper. His smirk from before was completely gone. But Pam wasn't done yet. The room felt heavier now, like everyone could feel the truth in the air. Judge Thornton held the paper a little tighter, like he was gripping something he hadn't expected to see. For the first time that day, Daniel Whitmore looked nervous. His usual confident, charming smile had disappeared. He tried to recover. He forced a small smile. Your Honor, he said, this so-called note is just a piece of paper. We don't even know if it's real. And even if it were real, it doesn't prove anything. Pam didn't let him finish. This document, she said firmly, came straight from someone who worked for this company. And that's not all. She took out another folder and handed it to the court officer. Here are emails, she continued. Emails that show company bosses talking about lies. These messages have dates, times, and come straight from their computers. The court officer handed the folder to Judge Thornton. He opened it and flipped through the pages. His face grew harder with each one. Daniel shot up from his chair. Objection, he called. Overruled, the judge said immediately. His voice was firm. He set the folder down and looked at Daniel. Mr. Daniel, he said, do you have a real legal argument or are you just here to waste my time? Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. Pam stood tall. She could feel it. The energy in the room had changed. The power had shifted. She turned to the jury. 4 years this company has hid behind tricky words and tiny print, she said. They knew the people signing these papers didn't have lawyers to help them. They counted on confusion. They counted on fear. They counted on doubt. She paused, letting the words sit in the air. Some of the jurors moved in their seats. But today, she said, that doubt is gone. She took a slow breath. Because now we have proof. She walked toward the back of the courtroom. Her clients sat there, regular people. Older folks, parents, small business owners. They weren't rich. They weren't powerful. They had trusted this company and now they had lost everything. Pam turned back to the jury. These aren't just numbers on a paper, she said. They are real people. She pointed at an older man in the crowd. This man lost all his retirement savings. She pointed at a woman next to him. She had to get a second job just to keep her home. She looked at them one by one. They trusted a system that was supposed to help them. But instead, the system was built to cheat them. Pam stepped closer to the jury box. Her voice was softer now, but just as strong. The bosses of this company sat in big offices, she said, drinking fancy coffee, making decisions about how much they could steal before people fought back. She scanned the jury, meeting their eyes. They counted on silence. They counted on fear. They counted on lawyers like Daniel Whitmore coming into this courtroom and convincing you that fraud is just business as usual. She took a step back. But it's not business as usual, she said. It's wrong. And now you know the truth. A murmur ran through the jury box. The woman in the front, who had been quiet all morning, nodded. Pam had them. Judge Thornton tapped his fingers on the bench, this time slower. He looked at Daniel. Mr. Daniel, he said, do you have anything to say? Daniel hesitated. Everyone could see it. The jury, the people in the gallery, even the court reporters who had stopped typing. He swallowed, adjusted his tie. Finally, he sat down. No, Your Honor, he muttered. Judge Thornton studied him for a moment, then turned to Pam. His expression wasn't quite admiration, but it was close. Proceed, Ms. Bondi, he said. The courtroom was no longer laughing. Pam took a deep breath. She had spent years in courtrooms like this, fighting against men like Daniel Whitmore, standing before judges like Thornton, battling against powerful companies that thought they could buy their way out of trouble. But right now, in this moment, she was the only person in the room who had full control, and she wasn't about to waste it. She turned around, her eyes quickly meeting Mr. Daniel's sharp stare for just a moment. Then she looked at the judge again. Your Honor, she said, her voice strong, the other side wants you to believe this is just a mistake, that my clients just didn't read the small words in the contract. But the truth is, those small words were written to trap them. It was a trick, a cage disguised as a deal. The moment they signed their names, the door shut tight. Pam took a step back toward her table. She didn't rush. She let her words sink into the air, heavy like a stone dropped in water. Then she placed both hands on the table and looked straight at Judge Calloway. The only question now, she continued, is whether this court will let them get away with it. The room fell completely silent. Not a single whisper. Not a single shuffle. For the first time, Judge Calloway didn't reach for his wooden hammer. He didn't make a joke. He didn't smile. Instead, he just stared at the papers in front of him as if seeing them for the very first time. The jury, the group of people who would help decide the case, was just as still. Some of them looked down at the contracts on their tables. Others glanced at Pam's clients, the people she was fighting for. Their faces were changing. A moment ago, some of them had seemed unsure, but now they looked different. Were they angry? Were they realizing their job was more important than they thought? Pam took a quiet breath. She had done what she came here to do. Then Judge Calloway finally spoke. Mr. Daniel, he said, his voice sounding heavier than before, after looking at all this evidence, I see no reason to dismiss this case. Mr. Daniel, the lawyer for the other side, tensed up. His lips pressed together. Your Honor, The judge lifted a hand, stopping him. No. His voice was firm. Your client will have to answer these claims in a full trial. Then he turned to Pam. Miss Bondi, he said, your request to continue this case is approved. Pam didn't smile. She didn't brag. She just gave a small nod. Thank you, Your Honor. But everyone in that room knew the truth. Daniel Whitmore knew. The jury knew. The people watching knew. Pam Bondi had already won the first fight before the real battle even started. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin as if he had just realized something important. He had walked into the courtroom today thinking this was a simple case, one that would end quickly. But now he was seeing things differently. Maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Pam Bondi stayed standing, strong and steady. She wasn't here to be liked. She wasn't here to celebrate. She had come to make sure this case was taken seriously, and she had done just that. But Daniel Whitmore was turning pale. His fingers were tight around his notebook, his knuckles white. He had no more tricks. No more sneaky moves to make this case disappear. Judge Calloway let out a slow breath, then looked at the court reporter, the person who wrote everything down. "Let the record show that the defense's request to end this case has been denied," he said. "This case will go to trial." A quiet wave of murmurs passed through the room. People whispered to each other. Some nodded. Some just sat there taking it all in. Pam didn't react, but she felt the change. The energy in the room had shifted. Judge Calloway looked at her again. This time his eyes were different. No more teasing. No more amusement. Just a quiet respect. He had underestimated her. And worse, he had let himself be fooled by the people she was fighting against. He straightened his black robe and cleared his throat. Then he spoke directly to her. "Miss Bondi," he said, his voice softer now, "you've made a strong case today." Pam simply nodded. "That was my goal, Your Honor." Pause. Then Judge Calloway looked at the papers again before turning to Daniel Whitmore. "I strongly suggest your client think carefully before going to trial," he said. His voice had an edge, a warning. "Because after what I've seen today, I don't think they'll like the outcome." Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what that meant. His client, the big, powerful company, had a lot of money. But money couldn't change facts. And now the court was paying attention. Pam calmly gathered her files, moving with the same confidence she had when she first walked in. There was no reason to celebrate yet. This was just the start. But as she glanced up, she saw something unexpected. Judge Calloway gave her a small nod. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission. But it was something else. A nod of respect. Pam Bondi had made the court listen. And now, the powerful people who always seemed to win, they had just met their match. Pam walked out of the courtroom without hurrying, her pace steady. She didn't look back. She had done her job. Now, it was up to the system to do the right thing. Outside, reporters were already waiting. "Miss Bondi, how do you feel about today's ruling?" one called out. "What's your next move?" another asked. "Do you think the company will settle?" Pam didn't stop. She wasn't here for the cameras. She wasn't here to give speeches. Instead, she turned toward her clients, the people she was fighting for. A group of men and women stood on the courthouse steps. Some were older, some younger. But they all had something in common. They had been ignored. They had been treated unfairly. A woman in a faded blue cardigan stepped forward, her hands slightly shaking. Her voice was soft but steady. "Does this mean we have a chance?" Pam looked at her and, for the first time that day, allowed herself a small smile. "Yes," she said simply. "You do." The woman gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. Around her, others whispered their thanks. Some nodded, too emotional to speak. Pam didn't need applause. She didn't need the spotlight. This moment was why she did what she did. Behind her, Daniel Whitmore stepped out of the courthouse. But he wasn't walking like he had before. He wasn't smug. He wasn't grinning. Instead, his face was tight, his movement stiff. He pulled out his phone, already dialing. Pam knew what was happening. His clients, the big company, were calling. They were panicking. They were scrambling for a plan. Good. Judge Calloway's ruling didn't mean Pam had won yet. But it sent a message. People were watching now. And no matter how powerful someone was, no amount of money or sneaky legal tricks could hide the truth forever. Pam turned back to her clients. "This isn't over," she told them. "Not yet. But today you made them listen. And that's where real change starts." The woman in the cardigan squeezed Pam's hand before stepping back. Pam took one last look at the courthouse, then let out a slow breath. She was already thinking about the work ahead. Justice wasn't just about winning one case. It was about never stopping the fight. And that fight? Pam Bondi had no intention of losing. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.